What is something that most act like an expert on, but few truly are? Anything involving science. You can immediately tell whether or not someone on this site has been through the academia machine. It disturbs me how most Redditors talk about scientists like they're a collective of enlightened beings who have evolved beyond pettiness and bias toward their own work/source of funding. Scientists are people. Some of them are liars who will fabricate data and think nothing of it. Some of them are opportunists who will milk cancer research grants for all they're worth. Some of them will deny repeatable, verifiable data if it means protecting their own life's work.
It's interesting how people elevate scientists to a pedestal. My friend once worked in a lab and saw firsthand how competition could influence results. Some researchers overstated findings just to secure funding. It was disheartening to realize that even in academia, personal motives can overshadow truth. It's a reminder that integrity is key in any field, but not everyone lives by that principle. Scientists are not immune to human flaws.
I'm a lawyer, and I can't tell you how many times I've been downvoted or criticized for giving the correct, to the extent anything in law is correct, answer to a legal question. Usually they include exchanges like this: Redditor, that's bullshit. You don't know what you're talking about. Me, I do. I'm a lawyer. Redditor, yeah, well, that doesn't make you an expert. This happened to my cousin, so I know firsthand what I'm talking about.
It's interesting how people react when they feel strongly about something. I know a few friends who've been in similar situations, like trying to explain tech issues to someone who thinks they know better because of a personal experience. They end up getting frustrated, but at the same time, it's hard to blame the other person for wanting to share their story. Everyone thinks their experience is the ultimate truth.
AI, machine learning, and automation. The way Redditors talk about AI, you could substitute the impending AI revolution for the rapture, and it'd sound exactly the same. All of them are talking out of their asses, and while it's an extremely exciting field, I keep getting reminded of the following joke. Question: is there anything that carbon nanotubes can't do? Hey, get out of the lab. The most frustrating part is that a lot of Redditors are advocating extremely radical social change in response to what they view as a certainty when that certainty is barely in its infancy. And if you go, hold up, you're basing this on the exact same impulse that leads Scientific American to declare cancer cured for the 5th time this month. It might be true, but we don't have enough information to tell yet. You're yelled at for being out of touch and stupid.
It's interesting how people react to new tech like AI. I remember someone I know getting really hyped about it, claiming it would fix everything. I just told them to chill, it's still a work in progress. They looked at me like I was the one missing out. It's funny how convinced some folks get about the future without realizing we're still figuring things out. Not everything needs a drastic change right away.
Religion. Well, mine in particular. Virtually every Reddit thread about Israel or Judaism immediately falls into a bunch of misconceptions and urban legends. It makes me realize how much of other religions talked about are wrong too. Joe Man effect, I guess. Of course, since there are a lot of religious Jews on here, and we absolutely love explaining things that usually gets corrected. For the last time, having a tattoo does not prevent your corpse from being buried in a Jewish cemetery. Edit yay. And I started an argument with 7 different opinions, all posting massive walls of text. Now this thread is really Jewish.
It's interesting how people have such strong opinions based on misconceptions. I've had similar experiences discussing beliefs with friends. Sometimes, they get stuck on stereotypes and refuse to see the bigger picture. It makes for some heated conversations. I find myself explaining things a lot, too. It's a mix of educating and just trying to find common ground. Funny how quickly discussions can spiral into debates.
Animals, especially when it comes to conservation and care of endangered species. Nearly every Redditor seems to know exactly what we should be doing and why everyone else is doing it wrong. Bonus points if they mention these magical places called sanctuaries where we should send all captive animals because somehow they have the space and funds for that. Not knocking the good sanctuaries, but they're not a cure-all solution.
It's interesting how people get so passionate about conservation online. A friend of mine ran a small rescue for a while. She saw firsthand that while sanctuaries are great, they can't take every animal. There just isn't enough space or resources. It's not as simple as some make it out to be. She learned that educating the public and working with local communities often helps more in the long run.
Law. I'm a lawyer, and even I can't figure out most of the cases that are brought up on here because of a lack of facts and location, state/country. I have initial thoughts on scenarios that are brought up, but a lot more is needed to be known to figure out what is really going on and how to apply the law. I see a lot of Redditors, not all, that post something which was the first thing they saw in their Google search when a much more thorough search is needed.
It's pretty wild how people expect legal advice based on minimal info. I remember a friend asked me about a lease issue. He was convinced he had a solid case but didn't even have the full contract. It's tough to make any judgment without knowing all the details. The law isn't just about quick answers, it needs context. I get why folks turn to Reddit, but it's rarely that simple.
I guess psychology, because same-sounding real-life, common-sense terms and logic versus objective scientific medical terms and logic can mean quite different. So people would give well-intended horrible advice for mental difficulties and advise radical behavior for complicated family and relationship problems.
It's interesting how well-meaning people can often miss the mark. A friend once tried to help me through my anxiety by suggesting I just calm down and think positively. Didn't realize that wasn't quite how it works. Everyone has their own perspective, but sometimes common sense advice doesn't cut it. It's a reminder that mental health isn't simple and takes understanding beyond surface level terms.
I'm a frequenter /r/fitness and /r/bodybuilding. It is extremely common knowledge, as well as preached very often within the subreddits, that guessing body fat percentage based on pictures is literally the most inaccurate way of determining what one's body fat percentage is. Generally, the DEXA scan has been accepted as the most accurate, while still not 100%, way of determining one's body fat percentage. However, there's always someone who posts their DEXA scan results with accompanied pictures. DEXA says 10.6% BF. Here's some pictures to show you what I look like, or something along those lines. On every single post, without fail, one of the top comments will be, "Bro, you look good and congrats on the progress, but judging by those pictures, there's no way you're 10.6% BF." The DEXA was probably wrong. It drives me crazy.
I get that feeling. It's like people just can't accept that the scan is actually accurate. I've seen guys post their DEXA results too, and it's wild how quick everyone is to call out the numbers. You'd think sharing progress would be more about support, but no, there's always someone ready to throw in their 2 cents. Kind of defeats the purpose of the community vibe.
Cars and automotive repair. Yeah, just watch a couple YouTube videos about car repair, and you can do basically anything on your car. You'll never need to go to a shop/dealership. While that's true for older cars, newer cars with advanced control modules require specific scan tools to work on. Also, I've seen my fair share of repair orders that say customer states they attempted to perform insert repair. Customer states car is driving/handling/sounding differently than before. Check and advise. Another thing, if you go to /r/shitty_car_mods, a lot people post pictures of bag trucks. They think the truck is lowered on static suspension, even though semi-trucks and trailers use air ride suspension. And bagging a vehicle, if done properly, is an expensive modification. If you correctly bag your truck, It can support its own weight and will be able to haul slash tow like it did with the stock suspension. There's a lot more, but I do see a lot of misinformation on Reddit about car repairs and cars in general.
Yeah, I've seen that too. People mentioning DIY fixes often miss the mark on modern cars. It's like they hear a few tips and think they're pros. I've had friends try fixes, and it just makes things worse. And yeah, car modifications can be costly and tricky. You can't just slap on parts and hope for the best. Sometimes it's better to leave it to the experts, especially with those advanced systems.
What's more annoying is discussions of psychology research. Sample sizes are too small, the population isn't diverse, usually just college kids forced to participate in research for credits, and societal views change over time, which can dramatically alter results between generations. Methodology is messy.
I get that. I once took a class in psych, and we had to read a bunch of studies. It felt like half the time, they were just pulling results out of thin air. Plus, we discussed how often the subjects were just students. Makes you wonder how valid those conclusions really are. It's like, are we even learning anything meaningful here? Just a lot of noise with little substance.
Irritates me when people say chocolate causes cancer. This study says so, where in reality there are about 10 studies done on the subject. 9 studies say there is no correlation between chocolate and cancer. The last one says there's a trend where people eat chocolate can get cancer. You can almost always be sure that people will take the chocolate equals cancer study for truth.
People often latch onto information without thinking it through. A friend of mine used to do this all the time. He would read a headline and just run with it, claiming all sorts of supposed facts. I remember having a conversation where he insisted that a certain food was bad for you, based on one questionable source. It got old pretty fast. It's a good reminder to look deeper before jumping to conclusions.
It disturbs me how most Redditors talk about scientists like they're a collective of enlightened beings who have evolved beyond pettiness and bias toward their own work/source of funding. I kind of blame XKCD for this one. They're funny comics, and they've done a great service in popularizing or demystifying some STEM concepts. But there's also this sort of underlying tone of reverent mysticism underneath it when it comes to the scientific method, and the scientists are portrayed as you described. Everyone who's interested in science should read A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. All the pettiness, deceit, violence, and greed you describe is laid bare, much of it done by scientists who achieved great things.
It's true that people often elevate scientists to this idealized status, but they're just humans with flaws. I've seen this in discussions, where folks ignore the messy sides of research. I remember a buddy of mine who was all about science and looked up to these figures. Then he read Bryson's book, and it totally shifted his perspective. He realized that the process is complicated and flawed, just like everything else.
I'm also a lawyer and could not agree more with what you said. People see and hear the law all the time in their personal lives, on television, in sports and entertainment. Sometimes I think that the exposure it gets leads to people thinking they just know it, despite never having cracked a law book or educated themselves on the topic.
I get what you're saying. It's funny how everyone thinks they're a legal expert just because they watch courtroom dramas or read a few headlines. I remember a friend who figured he understood contracts simply from seeing them in movies. When he tried to negotiate one himself, it was a mess. He learned the hard way that it's not as easy as it looks. Got a little too confident, I guess.
I haven't experienced people claiming to be working on anything, but a lot of people enjoy discussing renewable energy without any experience in generation/storage/transportation. Solar freaking roadways drove me insane. I had so many friends who thought it was an amazing idea and threw money at it. When I explained to them that my professor, a guy who has done extensive work in building microgrids in Kenya, wouldn't even discuss the idea because it's so dumb they just didn't care.
It's interesting how enthusiasm can sometimes blind people to actual feasibility. I had a similar situation with a friend who was all about green tech fads. They poured money into ideas without understanding the basics. I tried to explain why some projects were unrealistic, but it was like talking to a wall. People often get caught up in the excitement and ignore practical insights. It makes you wonder what drives that kind of belief.
This happens IRL too. I had a buddy talk about how he wanted to solve the energy storage problem with phones and how there had to be a better way. He mentioned wanting remote charging, and I was like, you mean with microwaves or radio waves? This is not the 1950s. Dude, you do realize that the EM spectrum is a thing, and there are only so many ways to transmit energy wirelessly. He then suggested we do it the same way the sun transmits energy. I responded with, like a solar panel?
I get how these conversations go. You want to help a friend who thinks they're onto something big. My friend once had this idea about building a car that runs on air. I just sat there, nodding, thinking about how we've got gas and electric already. I mean, some ideas sound cool, but sometimes you just have to bring them back to reality. It's good to dream, but sometimes you gotta keep it grounded.
Those things are not entirely understood IRL either. It's crazy at how non-physical ailments are so open to interpretation and cause so many discrepancies. I noticed this when my sister thought that she had ADHD. She saw multiple doctors. One said that she had ADHD. Two said that she didn't have ADHD. She ended up going with the doctor that said she tested positive for ADHD.
It's interesting how we look for answers in health. My friend went through something similar with anxiety. She saw a few therapists, and they all had different views. One said it was just stress from work, while another suggested it was a deeper issue. In the end, she stuck with the one who validated her feelings. It made her feel understood, even if the path to clarity was messy.
Most people here get the gist of computers because they use them a lot and can do things slightly above average competency. Unfortunately, they're perfect examples of why a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. They think that their mild competency makes them experts. It's especially prominent in the gaming subs where people will be talking about a bug and spout some nonsense about how simple it is to fix, followed by the stupidest if/, then statement or for loop. Bullshit like in League of Legends, there's currently a problem with a champion called Lux. Her ultimate ability is a laser that's supposed to hit everything in a line at a very long range. But currently, it's dealing no damage to invisible champions. Somebody will go, OMG, it's so simple. If ability location equals champion location, then apply damage. They are fixed. The devs are so fucking stupid. The shit that people spout on IT and CS topics makes me cringe.
I've seen this too. It's wild how people think a bit of knowledge makes them pros. Like those gamers who break down coding issues as if they're experts. The whole Lux situation is a good example. They don't see the complexity behind it. It's not just a simple fix. Makes you appreciate the actual developers who know what they're doing, while others just throw out half-baked ideas thinking they're genius.
Man, I build my own computers, work in the IT department for my college as a tech, and I encounter problems on a daily basis that I have no idea how to solve. I don't really have an adequate way to express what I do know about computer, but I can confirm the field is so vast and complex that you won't find many people proficient in every aspect. I work with a slew of people that know even less than I do, and a small handful of people that know as much. Unfortunately, our department is subdivided into client services, infrastructure, and enterprise, and the infrastructure/enterprise guys are like fucking sorcerers compared to what I thought was significant technical knowledge.
It's interesting how tech roles vary so much. You think you know a lot, but then you meet experts who just blow your mind with what they can do. I remember when I first started out, I felt pretty confident, but then you realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. Working alongside people with different skill levels makes you appreciate the complexity of the job even more. Learning never stops in this field.
I how at our slash relationship for this very reason. The answer to everything is dump her, divorce him, or ignore them and never see them again. It's so narrow-minded. Relationships are so complicated, but everyone there seems to oversimplify everything and act like the answer is so obvious when in reality, there never is just one right answer.
I get what you mean. It's like people forget that every situation is unique. I had a friend who faced a similar issue and people just told him to cut ties without considering his feelings or the history involved. It's frustrating when advice is so one-dimensional. Sometimes, talking things out or just taking time helps more than the dump them mentality. Relationships are messy, and they usually need more than a quick fix.
To be fair, so many people that post in that sub are asking for validation of their instinct to leave a relationship. Doing so, especially when you put lots of time into it, is really difficult, and most people coast it out less than happy to avoid that. I think so many of the comments on that sub are lawyer, Jim, and delete Facebook because people are trying to be encouraging about a decision that the OP has basically already made but needs validation to know it's okay.
It's true. I've seen friends struggle with similar situations. They get stuck, not wanting to end things after investing years. It's like they're looking for a push to make that final choice. Sometimes, they just need reassurance that it's fine to prioritize their happiness. It's a tough spot, but often, they already know what they want. They just need that little nudge from others to follow through.
It's amazing how, when you start learning about AI and ML, just how fast the magic goes away. ANNs are just matrix multiplication and gradient descent. Most recommender systems just compute the angle between two vectors. Chess-playing algorithms are just tree traversals with a lot of obvious and a few not-so-obvious optimizations. Genetic algorithms are just stochastic, sometimes optimizations of other algorithms. Every time someone makes a Matrix or Skynet joke about an AI post on Reddit, I want to sit them down with essentials of metaheuristics and explain exactly how stupid they are.
It's funny how enthusiasm can fade when you dig into something deeper. AI looks impressive from a distance, but it quickly turns technical and less magical. The complexity really just breaks down into mathematical operations. I get the urge to correct those joking about AI in pop culture, but people love their misunderstandings. Sometimes, it's just easier to let them have their fun than to dive into the details.
A high school friend of mine is trans, and we ran a concert together back in the day. I am now the world's leading authority on trans issues, as well as the music industry and all knowledge pertaining to light and sound setups at public venues. I'm marine biology, since the concert was at a beach.
That's cool to hear about your friend and the concert. It sounds like a unique experience combining music and a beach setting. Doing events like that can really deepen friendships, especially when you're collaborating on something creative. It's interesting how paths evolve, with you becoming an authority in various fields. Music, light setups, and marine biology make for a diverse set of interests. Kind of a memorable chapter in your lives, for sure.
Following on from that, people making jokes like, I identify as a pillowcase, and this triggers me. Like, all right, we get it. You don't believe in non-binary people or triggers. Cool. But can you please just let us live? Like, there's been times where I've been on a video that wasn't even about LGBTQ people, possibly a Jax Films, and then you just had a ton of people mocking NB people. Fitz Bachmann.
It's tough when people can't just let others exist. I've seen similar things in online spaces. Sometimes, a video has nothing to do with sensitive topics, but the comments turn into a field day for mockery. It's like, why can't we just enjoy the content? People should be free to express themselves without being ridiculed. Just a bit more understanding could go a long way.
I like when they diagnose people with psychopathy after reading a single article about the crimes or actions somebody committed. No, the man that killed his wife in a jealous rage isn't necessarily a psychopath. That's a very serious diagnosis that takes quite a few sessions with an expert to label someone as.
I get what you mean. It's easy to jump to conclusions based on limited info. Diagnosing someone based on a quick read feels more like speculation than real understanding. Everyone's situation is different, and just labeling someone like that can be pretty misleading. It's important to take a deeper look before making those kinds of judgments.
Dad was a Jew that converted to Baptist Christianity because his mom remarried to a pastor. Mom was a Catholic that converted to Baptist because her husband was. Now I'm a Hebraic Christian because I believe in Jesus, but wanted to stay connected to my roots. Honestly, I'm not sure which side gets it worse. I was raised in 3 different religious traditions and expected to study and know them. But for some reason, people still try to tell me what I believe. Just live and let live, man. It's not such a crazy concept.
It's interesting how different backgrounds shape beliefs. Your experience with those mixed traditions makes for a unique perspective. People often struggle to understand others' faith journeys. It's all about finding what resonates with you personally. In a way, it reflects how everyone is trying to figure things out. Just knowing who you are and where you come from is enough. Letting people be themselves is key.
I think you nailed it in your third to last paragraph, that people are often interested in history, but not often in the methods that lead to good practice of history. This principle probably applies to a lot of the cases presented in this thread. That said, I don't know that coming after podcast entertainers is particularly helpful. If I go watch Lord of the Rings and believe it's real, is the guy who made the movie an idiot or am I? Granted, that's a rather extreme example, but Dan Carlin is using the exciting parts of history in a Hollywood sense, and average analogies precisely because they help him hit the widest audience, which makes him more money, all while hopefully inspire people to move toward a deeper interest in the field. I think ideally these subreddits, particularly ones with fairly stringent and serious methods and practice, should start offering some meta-guidance on the fields themselves, else the problem highlighted by this topic is bound to continue happening.
It's true, a lot of people love history but not the nitty-gritty of it. And yeah, I see the point about podcasts too. Like, if someone gets lost in a movie's world, it's not always the creator's fault. Dan Carlin makes history interesting for a reason. If serious places don't help people understand the methods behind history, then they'll keep missing the learning part. That could be a real issue down the line.
Reddit likes short answers to complex questions. I think people in general are like that. I haven't listened to Carlin, but one of the things I like about Crash Course is that he specifically points out that it is a crash course, not a thorough analysis. I think it's great for people who don't know much and want to start learning, but I think John Green would slap your face if you cited it as a legitimate source for a definitive answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. People often prefer quick summaries over deep dives. It's like when a friend asks for movie recommendations. I just give a few titles instead of a long review. Crash Course does a good job of giving the essentials without overwhelming you. It's useful for starting conversations, but definitely not for finals. Like you said, John Green would probably want more from us if we used it as a serious source.
I was amazed that I had to scroll this far down to find this. CPA here as well, and it's staggering how mystified some people are when it comes to dealing with their own personal tax returns, let alone those of corporations. The step-by-step instructions for every single IRS form are available on their website. Just read, people. Although I admit that our current tax code is horribly and needlessly complex.
It's interesting how many people struggle with taxes, even with all the resources available. I remember trying to help a friend with his returns once. He was completely lost, even with the IRS instructions right in front of him. It makes you realize how complicated the whole system can be. No wonder folks prefer just to hand it off to someone else.
I think the worst misconception of psychology is thinking psychology equals psychiatry. Most people don't understand psychology, what its purpose is, or its methodology. I don't know much either, being just a first-year student, but my perspective shifted quite a bit in just that first year. The worst part is that pop psychology is so rampant on social media and in daily life that it's no wonder people get these woefully wrong ideas about the field.
I get that. When I started learning about psychology, I was surprised by how often people blur the lines between psychology and psychiatry. It's not just about mental illness, it's also about understanding behavior and thoughts. I remember discussing this with a friend, and we realized how many myths we had before diving into the actual study. It's important to get the definitions right, especially with all the pop psych stuff out there.
Shut up, dude. If folks stop believing that it's a piece of cake to fix things, they might not try it, and thus not totally fuck things up. I make twice as much dollar of calls where the owner had to go at fixing things. I almost feel I should send some of my dollar to YouTube, because the clips on there encourage people to try.
I get what you're saying. It's wild how many people dive into DIY fixes after watching those videos, thinking it's easy. I had a friend who tried to fix a leaky sink. Ended up making it worse and had to call a pro. I guess there's a fine line between trying to save money and just causing more problems. But hey, at least it keeps the repair guys busy.
I understand how plumbing and HVAC work, and I could probably identify the problem. What I don't have are the tools and skills to fix it quickly. I could probably crawl under my house and figure it out, but by the end of it I'll be tired and pissed and spent way too long trying to fix it. Knowing your limits on how to handle your infrastructure is important.
It's true. Sometimes, knowing when to call for help is more valuable than trying to do it all yourself. A friend of mine had the same issue with his HVAC. He thought he could fix it. Ended up frustrated, and yeah, it took him way longer than he expected. In the end, he called a pro and learned that some jobs are just better left to those who know what they're doing.
Being perfectly honest here, a large amount of the work published, in my field at least, is garbage. Now, I don't mean the findings themselves are garbage, but oftentimes the way things are written is just kind of shit. I don't think this is necessarily the author's fault, though, for two reasons. One, it's hard to compress years' worth of work from multiple people into a super cohesive manuscript without forgetting something. Two, scientists are people, and more importantly, are people who are largely self-taught and highly competitive. When you see people doing things a different way, it's highly likely you'll be suspicious, as it's unfamiliar to you what or why they're doing it. For reference, I'm writing a manuscript right now, or at least I should be, and after just sending a hopefully second last copy to my PI, realized that I forgot to mention all the controls I listed beforehand were negative.
I get that. It's tough to consolidate so much info into a clear paper. The pressure can lead to mistakes that are easy to overlook. I remember working on a group project where we missed a key finding in our final draft. You think you have everything, then you realize something important slipped through the cracks. It happens to everyone, especially in a competitive field. Just keep at it, you'll get it done.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.